Hello everyone, first off I do apologise for the sound in this video. It's too hot in the UK to have my door closed, so you're going to hear things going on in the background like cars, like that one that just went past. This is a video on the TP-Link AC1200 Mesh Wi-Fi router, full gigabit MU MIMO, and it's the Archer C6. I'd previously done a video on the Archer C64, which is quite a good router. This one is, I guess, the same kind of series, but seems to have very different software. So we're going to look at the router, and then after that there's going to be a comprehensive video, or at the end of this section, a video of the web interface of this router. So if you need to know where to find something, or if you're trying to talk somebody through configuring the router and you don't have one of these routers in front of you, you can look through the video and see all the pages and what they look like. So let's open this up. That's the router in its box, in a little sleeve. What is weird is you can kind of see down here, the gap in the top of the router, the back of the network socket colour. Really, I think, quite weird. So on the front of the router you've got on the left side the power light. You have two Wi-Fi lights. The one on the left is probably the 2.4 GHz, the one in the middle is, or the right of the two wireless ones, will be the 5 GHz status light. You've then got the Ethernet status light if you're plugged in using a network cable, and then the internet light as to whether you're connected to the internet. You've got 4 aerials at the back of the router, which you can put in various different ways or orientations if you need or want. Nothing on the side, nothing on the other side of the router. On the underside of the router is quite important if you're not using a network cable to set this up. You have the default wireless password, which is just underneath the barcode, and also the default wireless name. And if you so wish, a QR code to scan to connect to it so you don't have to type in the password. On the back of the router you've got a physical power button, the power socket, a blue WAN port for your Ethernet connection off to your ONT or your modem, and then 4 LAN sockets, LAN 1, 2, 3 and 4, and on the far right side here you've got a WPS button, and also the factory reset pinhole below the WPS button. The power supply which comes with this is 12 volts and 1 amp output, with a connector barrel which looks a bit like that. Got some bits of paper and manuals as well, and a network cable. And I will show the manual because sometimes people want this. I'm just going to show it really quickly, so if there's a page that you want to read, you're going to have to pause the video. Not very much on that page, and only a slightly bit more information on the next page. So there we go, that's what that router looks like. The next thing you will see will be me using a laptop connected to the router, and what the web interface looks like and how you set up this router. If this has already been helpful to you, it'd be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thanks. Okay, so moving on to the web interface of this Archer C6 router. The default IP address of it is 192.168.0.1. And it really doesn't work on small resolutions, so I'm going to have to zoom out, and hopefully we can see more. See, yeah, there's a little cross symbol on that app install thing which falls off the edge of my screen, so close that. First thing it will do is ask you to set a password. So these things don't come with a default admin password, they require you to set one as one of the first things you do. So I'm going to call that password 1. Probably still not going to like it. Okay, maybe, yeah, let's try to go password 1. Okay, and we are now into the main admin thing. Once I type in the password a second time. And here is the setup wizard. What I will do is log out and just quickly see what the forgotten password option does. Okay, it basically just tells you you have to factory reset the router by putting a paperclip or similar into the reset button for 10 seconds. So the front page of the router gives you a little map of your options, and if you scroll down it also gives you the status of the internet. I'm going to click on internet and see what that does. I see it just changes what is shown further down the page. I'm going to click on the C6 MU MIMO Wi-Fi router, and it tells you more details about the Wi-Fi and the MAC address and the names that it's broadcasting, and also the Ethernet and which of the sockets is connected and at what speed. Going back up to the top, clicking on mesh, or in fact we can click on mesh devices. I don't have any mesh devices, and I also thought when I bought this router, the C6 router, that I'd be able to use it with the C64 router, which is also a one mesh device. However, upon reading into it more, it seems that you can only connect to, for example, power line devices or wireless repeater devices. You can't use multiple routers as part of the mesh network, which I think is a bit of a missing feature on that. Clicking on wired clients shows you IP addresses of wired things and their MAC addresses, and wireless clients, if I had any connected, would show you that as well. So that's under the default page which it loads at, which is the network map. I did exit out of the quick setup, so I'm going to run that again, which is what you'll get when you first log onto it if you don't do what I did and log out. So set your time zone. Set the connection type. So for a lot of cable providers it will probably be dynamic IP, and a lot of fibre to the home providers, and especially in the UK you'll be using PPPoE. The ISP profile is probably quite specific to certain geographies, and probably sets VLANs and other things. Yeah. And PPPoE should ask you for a username and password, which I presume it's going to do on the next page. Yes, it does. Yeah. So mine's dynamic IP. I'm going to go next. It offers for you to clone the MAC address of a device. It's unusual that you need to do that these days, but you can if you need to. Offers to set up wireless if you wanted to customize the name and the wireless password. Gives you a summary of what you're about to set, and will then offer to sign you up to the TP-Link app service. I think that's where you can use an app to control the router and potentially also control the router when you're not at home or not in the office or whatever connected to that network, you can probably use the app and make changes. It will go through TP-Link's cloud service and to your router to make those changes. However, I wouldn't recommend using it unless you know that you want to. It's just extra stuff to sign up for, extra apps to install. So I'm going to do the login later option. And we're back to the screen which I'd already gone through. Going to Internet, you'll see pretty much what it offered you during the setup wizard for the different types of internet connectivity. L2TP and PPTP are VPNs. So if you're buying this as a separate VPN router to plug into your normal internet, you could select these and then fill in your VPN provider's details. Moving on to the wireless screen, again, looks pretty much like what you saw in the setup wizard. Doesn't give you a huge amount of options to change. Guest wireless network. If you had visitors that needed to visit and you didn't want them to access your computers or your network printers or any other things on your network, you can enable the guest network as long as you don't tick these options at the top to allow them to access your network or even access each other. Then that's quite a secure way of giving guests access to the internet, but nothing else. Parental Controls is always an interesting one to try, so let's see how this works. And on that computer, oops, I want to block bbc.co.uk. Let's give that a go. And hopefully by ticking none of those, it will apply the block all of the time. Now let's see whether we can get to bbc.co.uk. Brilliant. Interesting that it puts an actual block page there. Let's see what happens if we use HTTPS. Because it shouldn't be able to intercept that and give its own message. It should only be able to say connection refused as a browser error message. If I delete this, oh, it did have an insight, so I'll click that in a minute actually. I'll reset it up and see. But now I've deleted that, it should immediately allow me to get to the BBC website. Although interestingly, doesn't appear to. Definitely removed that. Try it in a different browser. Okay, it's working in a different browser, so maybe it just takes a little bit of time to apply. Yeah, there we go. Let's try adding that again and see what the Insights button does. So that should block BBC again, although it appears it doesn't, so we'll give it just a few seconds. I'll chop the gap out of the video. So okay, let's try that again. Nope, can still get there. Let's try a different browser again. That can also get to it. What I'm guessing is wrong here is I probably do need to assign a device which is blocked on. It doesn't just apply to everything if you don't select anything. So I need to select the computer I want to block it on and save that. Let's still allowing me in that browser. Let's try in a different browser. Okay, good. So it does take time to apply the block. Now I've attempted to access it a few times. Let's click on Insights and see what that does. It doesn't seem particularly useful. No history? Seems wrong, but okay. I think probably a bit of a useless feature, that Insights thing. However, at least the blocking function does work if you did want to block particular sites or domain names. This one, unlike the Archer C64, the QoS option does work. So if I do a speed test now across its gigabit LAN, we should see nearing 1000 megabits per second. Which we do. Now, if I go and enable QoS to, for example, let's set it to 100 megabits per second. That limits the speed to 100 megabits per second. So the Archer C64, when you enable this feature, does nothing. The speeds remain the same. There are some people in the, I think it's TP-Link forums, which keep arguing about, oh, QoS is not rate limiting. And indeed, QoS probably shouldn't be rate limiting. However, when one router, so the Archer C6, acts like it is a rate limiter when you enable QoS, and then the Archer C64 does not perform in the same manner, I would say there's a bug with their firmware or a communications issue with their development teams over what the feature is supposed to do and how it's supposed to function. So let's set that to, say, 500 megabits just to make sure that works. So yes, upload is at 500 megabits and download is at 250, which is the results we see there. Turn off QoS and we should see the gigabit speeds again. Perfect. TP-Link Cloud, went through that at the beginning, not worth using. And WAN Mesh. I sadly don't have any WAN Mesh devices to test with, so I can't go through that screen either. Moving on to the advanced settings. The status screen gives a whole lot more information than on the basic screen. Also shows CPU use, as a dual-core CPU, and memory usage. Moving on to network and internet, we get advanced options. You can set the MTU, DNS servers, set it to clone a particular MAC address if you needed to, and that's it for the dynamic IP settings. I'm going to go through the most likely used one in the UK, which will be PPPoE, where you can fill in a username and a password, and the advanced options give you apparently a secondary connection, so I'm not sure how that works. You can set the MTU, force an IP address, which is an interesting one on PPPoE. Presumably won't work, or you won't get internet access, or it will just override it and give you the IP that the provider wants to give you. And set it to on-demand or time-based connection if you needed to, which would be very unusual these days because the internet's pretty much always on for everywhere. Moving on to LAN settings, you can change the IP address and subnet mask. Skipping IPTV for the moment, I'll come back to that. DHCP server is where you can enable and disable the DHCP server and change the IPs or the range of IPs that it gives out. Also, you can reserve an IP address for a MAC address. So if you have a printer that you can't set on the printer a static IP address, you can fill in its MAC address, fill in the IP address you want it to have, make sure you tick on enable this entry, save it, and then each time the printer is switched on, it will always be given the same IP address. Dynamic DNS, it supports TP-Link's own dynamic DNS service or DDNS service, no IP.org or .com, which is free, and Dyndns, which is not free. Going back to IPTV, this will give you the option to, I think, enable a VLAN. Which will bridge through to one of the ports. So if you had a set-top box plugged into port number 3, you could bridge the IPTV VLAN through to that set-top box. It's not a function I've ever seen used in the UK or the US, but other countries may use it. Static routing, if you had multiple routers on your network and you needed a particular IP range destination to go to a different router, you can use the static routing option or screen there. Operation mode, it can work in access point mode or router mode. Obviously by default it'll be in router mode, but if you wanted it to be an access point, you can just do access point. That will switch off the DHCP and most of its routing functions and turn it into just a Wi-Fi point. So in the advanced wireless settings, you can set the type of encryption and password, change its transmit power, and enable Airtime Fairness if you've got a fairly heavy or busy network. You can start the WPS method without having to get up and press the button on the router. You can just do this in the web interface by pressing that button there, or join it using WPS pin, where you can type in a number either on the router or on the device like the printer that you're trying to connect, and it will connect with just that number rather than needing to type the whole password in. Wireless schedule will be good if you are in a shop or something and you only wanted to give access to the internet during certain times, and you can turn the Wi-Fi off automatically outside of those hours. Going on to One Mesh, same screen. I don't have any One Mesh devices, so I can't go through that option. Guest network. It's pretty much the same as the information you saw on the basic setup screen. Parental controls, I suspect, will be almost exactly the same, if not exactly the same. Yeah, looks exactly the same as what I've already been through on the basic setup screen. QoS, we've already been through that as well. Interesting crossover of all the options that appear apparently in both places. Security does not appear on basic, so this is a new screen. You have firewall, you've got stateful packet inspection, I think, firewall. DDoS protection. Unless you know what you're doing, I wouldn't switch that on. First off, you're very unlikely to be the target of a denial of service attack, and generally turning DOS protection on is more likely to cause problems, for example, with VoIP or games, where it incorrectly classifies something as a denial of service and blocks it. I would generally untick this option to ignore pings from the WAN. It's very convenient to be able to ping your own router to, say, if you're out and you want to know whether your internet's working. If you block pings, you've got no idea. A lot of people ages ago said that it's a security issue because you can tell that whether a connection that you want to attack is up or whether you're making a difference. But really, it's again, you're so unlikely to be the target of an attack, it's not worth enabling blocking of pings on the internet side. Access controls is where you would block or allow based on MAC address of a computer or a telephone that's connecting. It's trivial to spoof MAC addresses on a network or on Wi-Fi, so you're better off securing your network by having a secure password on the Wi-Fi, or changing the password if somebody gets hold of the password and you don't want them connecting to your network. Because if they know your password and you try and block them using MAC addresses, if they know what they're doing, or even just Google what they want to do, spoofing MAC addresses to get around that block will be incredibly easy. IP address and MAC binding is to do with ARP entries and MAC spoofing. It's an unusual thing to have on a home router. It is so unusual I wouldn't even bother going through this, trying to explain the reason you'd use it, and ARP spoofing and interception is not really what this video is for, and I'd say is not likely to happen in your network anyway. And if it is, then you don't want to be using a TP-Link router as your router, because you're in a hostile environment, and you should be using something bigger and more enterprise-like. In the NAT forwarding section, you've got the ALGs, which is the application layer gateways. If you find, for example, that VoIP is an issue, quite often the routers, or any router, it doesn't have to be a TP-Link router, a very common one is the BT routers in the UK, mess up VoIP. Enabling and disabling the SIP ALG might fix your issue, and the same for all of these other protocols as well. Virtual servers will be port forwarding. So if you wanted to port forward, for example, a mail server or a game server, let's do, not that people use SMTP servers much these days, but port 25 externally, we'll send it through to 192.168.0.56 as my mail server, and onto port 25 at the mail server, and it's TCP. If you're doing a game server, you'd normally or quite often select UDP for that. If you don't know, you can select all, and it will do both TCP and UDP with very little detriment to your setup anyway. And there we go, that's how you set up port forwards. It looks like you can toggle them on and off by clicking on the status icon, or you can delete it entirely. Port triggering, I've never known anyone to use this. It's to do with if somebody makes a connection on, for example, port 25, the router can then automatically open up other ports. It's really obscure. I'm not going to bother going through that. I might show you what the screen looks like though. There you go, but port triggering is not to be confused with port forwarding, which is actually called on this router is called virtual servers. DMZ is the ability to port forward every single IP address, every single port on this on your internet side through to a computer in your network. This will be useful if you want that computer to host many things, and you know that it's secure, and you don't want to individually port forward things through to that computer. It's also quite often given as a fix for NAT type problems on games. Setting a DMZ might fix some issues. It's a horrible way to fix quite a complicated issue. The better option is to find out what ports you actually need to forward, and then forward those through to just those ones through to your game console, rather than setting it to DMZ. UPnP is also quite helpful for games, but also less helpful if you're worried about the security of your network. So UPnP will allow devices and software on your network to automatically set up port forwards on the router, so you don't have to. So for example, if you're using a torrent client, to download something, it might forward some ports through to your computer to make the torrents work better, and other peers on the torrent network to be able to connect through to you without you having to log into the router and forward those ports. It's potentially a security risk because some bad software on your computer could also do the same thing to be able to communicate. So, difficult one to know whether it's worth having switched on your network. Moving on to IPv6, which sadly is off by default, but can be enabled and gives you several different types of connectivity: static IPv6 IP, dynamic, PPPoE, 6 to 4 tunnel, which is something like Tunnel Broker or HE.net, and pass-through. VPN Server looks like this router can host OpenVPN, which is pretty good. So if you know how to use OpenVPN and you enable the option here, you can be out on the road and connect into your home network using OpenVPN and get to everything within your network, and also use the internet as if you were at home. So for example, if you go abroad and you connect into your VPN, you can then access all of the TV services from your country of where your router is. It also looks like it hosts a PPTP VPN. PPTP is much older and less secure than OpenVPN, but is also simpler to set up, and it doesn't need any extra software. So PPTP is built into Windows, built into Android phones and Apple Mac computers. And VPN connections looks like it shows you the status of whether anyone is connected. Smart Life Assistant appears to allow you to control the router using Alexa or Google. I think it will say stuff like, prioritize gaming. You can do other things, I think, like enabling blocks on websites that you've set up and other things. Under System Tools, we have the time settings, so daylight savings time, and also where it gets its time from. So get it from the computer, fill in the time manually, or by default it reaches out to the internet and gets the time off of the internet. LED control. The router really doesn't have very bright LEDs, but if for some reason the LEDs did annoy you, you can switch them off there, or have it set to switch off at certain times during the day or night. Diagnostics lets you just do pings and trace routes. Firmware upgrade, you can upgrade over the internet by pressing the check for upgrade button, or you can download it from the TP-Link website and then manually upload the file through the local upgrade section. I've checked this router was delivered to me already fully up to date, but let's see what happens when I click it again. So it just says your firmware is up to date, but I presume it would give you the option to apply the update if there was an update available. You can back up and restore its settings, so you could back it up, factory reset it, test something, and if you find that you didn't want those settings, you could just restore your old settings. You can also factory restore the settings on the router. One of the worst options for routers, I think, an automatic reboot schedule. If your network or your router is so badly designed that you need to reboot it regularly, then something's wrong. We shouldn't be encouraging router manufacturers to make dodgy hardware. Their routers shouldn't need rebooting, and if there's something wrong with your network where rebooting the router fixes it, you should probably identify what that issue is and fix it. Under administration, you can change the admin logon for the web interface. set password recovery where it sends you an email if you forget the logon to administer the router. Enable access to the router over the internet, either from every IP address or a specific IP address. System log gives you quite a lot of detail about what the router is doing, when it was switched on, and possibly when it was switched off again. So Traffic Monitor gives you a summary of how the internet has been used throughout the day, and also further down at the bottom of the page gives you a list of the devices that are connected and how much internet they're using at a time. So if I run a speed test, we should see the real-time rate goes up to what I'm actually using through the network interface. Although potentially not very accurate. Oh yeah, I see it's moving into megabytes per second rather than kilobits per second. The system parameters will give you a lot of stuff that you probably shouldn't change unless you definitely know what you're doing to do with wireless. WDS bridging may be useful for some people who have wireless repeaters or other routers, WDS enabled wireless routers, which will then allow things like AirPrint and broadcast traffic to work better over that wireless bridge. On this page we've also got some of the denial of service trigger levels. And there we go, that's the web interface of this router. Hopefully this video has been interesting to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have the video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thank you very much.